we fighting for, brothers? We're fighting for a righteous world. 2 Peter 3:13. We're fighting for a world of total righteousness. We're fighting for a world where we're going to be exalted, where we're going to be lauded, where we're going to be praised as the people of the Most High, as the Israelites, as the elect of the nation of Israel. Think about that, man. The elect of the nation of Israel, part of the 144,000. Think about that. Huh? That alone should inspire you. There's even a song, man, oh, when the saints come marching in. We're those saints that's going to come marching in. Oh, I want to be in that number. We're in that number. We believe that according to faith. Come on, brothers.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors to the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples for his younger brothers. And peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word in truth and in sincerity across the four winds. In the name of Yahweh Bashem Shai, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners, whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Shai. All right. And we want to continue on in the book of Acts. Okay, we made it to the 16th chapter. Okay. And in this chapter, we're going to see Timothy, come on the scene, which, is a vital, part of, Apostle Paul's ministry. He traveled, he would later become, Apostle Paul's, protege, and he will be eventually over the church of Ephesus, the book of Ephesians. Okay. And his grandmother, and his mother, believed, and they practiced Israelite customs even before, them being converted, but his father was a Greek. So Timothy was, a unique situation. His father was a Greek. His father was a Jake that didn't believe. Okay, just like you can have, even today a woman, and her son might be in the truth, but the man, all right, is not, a believer. Okay, there's no difference. And when you look at our situation today and look at these situations in the scriptures, well, we see that they're one and the same. Okay, because there's no doubt that we're, that church, okay, coming back. These epistles, these letters was written to believers, okay, of that time, Okay, but now you have to fully believe that though all those spirits are back, being gathered again for the deliverance. Because now we're in the time of the second coming. This is their lifetime of the second coming. Okay, so we can relate, to these letters, to these situations. That's why, we go into these letters, okay, to bring judgment, to certain situations that, brothers, and you few sisters might find yourself in. Okay, we can go into the epistles, okay, and get real live examples according to what was going on in those churches back then, and bring, judgment and solutions to situations and circumstances that we find ourselves in as Israelite foreigners, having to come back to who we are, coming back to righteousness and understanding, rehearsing the righteous acts, certain circumstances that we're in, okay, that are similar to what we read about in these epistles, okay, in these accounts, in the book of Acts. So when you go here, all right, we're going to go into a few things. This Acts 16:1. And it said Paul went first, this is an NLT, to Derbe and then to Lystra, where there was a young disciple named Timothy. His mother, all right, was an Israelite believer, but his father was a Greek. Okay. So his father was an Israelite that didn't believe. He was Hellenized. Okay. But his mother was of, which woman and can't be circumcised. When we say the circumcision, you speaking of those that was brought up in the way, in the customs, because her mother was brought up in the customs. Now, it doesn't speak of her, her father, okay? And it is possible that he could have been brought up in the customs, okay? But she was married, to a non-believer, okay? A Jake that was of your Greekish fashion, as the scriptures say, you know? But she was, at least we know, second generation, okay, um of those that knew that there was Israelite that was practicing the customs. Okay, it says Timothy was well thought of by the believers in Lystra and Iconium. So Timothy already had, a reputation, amongst Lystra and Iconium. So Paul wanted him to join them in their ministry in defense to the Jews of the area. He arranged for Timothy to be circumcised before they left, for everyone knew that his father was a Greek. Now, you'll read this and, you'll be like, well, wait a minute, and thought circumcision wasn't, necessary. Well, it wasn't. And Paul wasn't doing the circumcision, okay, on behalf of, acquirement for salvation. He did the circumcision because he understood, the background that Timothy came from, and he was going to have Timothy with him in, in these different synagogues, all right, amongst the circumcision. Okay, so for the sake of, you know, uh, for the sake of wisdom, Apostle Paul made a judgment call, okay, to where it will be easier on Timothy, being amongst, this circle of the circumcision, to be circumcised, as he was going to become a teacher and a leader and the overseer of the ministry. Okay. So to do away with that barrier, something that will be a hindrance, okay, unnecessarily. All right, the Apostle Paul made a judgment call, okay, for circumstance sake, but it wasn't for the sake of salvation. Circumcision wasn't required for salvation. Okay, but in Timothy's circumstance, okay, it was a wise thing to do because of the position he was coming into and what he was going to be around, being heavily tied to the Apostle Paul. Okay, and this also shows you too, by Timothy not being circumcised, that his mother was in order to his father. Okay, which was a non-believer. Was he, more than likely was uncircumcised. Okay, and that's why the Apostle Paul goes here. When you go to like 1 Corinthians 7, it's the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I start at verse 12. Says, "Now I speak to the rest of you, though I do not have a direct command from the Lord. All right, if a believing man has a wife who is not a believer, and she is willing to continue living with him, he must not leave her." Okay, so whatever situation you was in when you come into the truth, okay, if it's not a hindrance to your growth, to your faith, to your walk, and she's pleased to dwell with you, if she's still agreeable, okay, and not counterproductive, against the truth, then you can continue to dwell. You know, the Apostle Paul, was big on about keeping, families together if it was possible. Okay. And it says, but because one thing, that is a thing that can be lost, especially as a man, in this truth, okay, is your family because of your faith. Okay. But if it were possible, Apostle Paul was about keeping, the family together. Okay. Because things can change. He's going to go into it, 1 Corinthians 7 and 13. And if a believing woman, all right, like Timothy's mother, has a husband who is not a believer, Timothy's father was considered Greek, because he was just an Israelite that was into, like I said, the Greek is fashion. It says, and if a believing woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to continue living with her, she must not leave him. Okay, so Timothy's mother was in order. Okay, and the Lord had it work out because she wanted Timothy to be circumcised, but his father probably wasn't with it. Okay, but now as he's of age and he's getting ready to leave and be on a mission with Paul, the Spirit had him to be circumcised, which his mother had been one that is a speculating spirit, is scrapulate. Okay, but she was what, under the order of her husband. You see, so she stayed in order, and the Lord still worked it out. Okay, in her favor as a believer. It says, "For the believing wife brings holiness to her marriage." Okay, and the believing husband brings holiness to his marriage. Otherwise, your children would not be holy, but now are they holy? So this is a perfect example, okay, of the woman being of the faith, okay, and the faith of that woman, is sanctifying their house, just like the faith and the belief of that man sanctifies his house. Okay, now the Lord, I say there's different, situations. All right, but the Lord can have mercy and eventually allow, the man to come in and believe. And as you can see with this situation with Timothy, Timothy, he was a believer because of his believing mother. Okay, just like you can have, children. Okay, brothers have children. The woman might not believe like that, but then the children be, hard body, believers. Just what I've seen. Okay, with my own eyes. Okay, and the Lord still have mercy on what, that whole house. Okay, she follow him, in the time of tribulation, and the Lord have mercy on that whole house. Okay, so that's why the Apostle Paul wasn't about, just breaking up families just because of disbelief. If the situation was still okay, cool, okay, and it wasn't counterproductive, you know, and then it teaches us patience too. All right, because the Lord gonna work a work and put everything in its proper perspective. Okay, going into salvation, going into the time of the end, the Lord's He's gonna make the moves that need to be made. He's gonna get rid of certain pieces on the chessboard that need to be moved. Okay, for the sake of salvation. But then it's a thing of patience. We can't, rush the situation we got to endure, whatever situation, that we in, and move with wisdom, you know. So let's go back to the book of Acts. All right, this is the book of Acts, chapter 16, verse 4 says, Then they went from town to town, introducing the believers to follow the decisions made by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in their faith and grew large every day. So the church is just, constantly growing. Okay. So they're teaching, about the council, what was the verdict, dealing with the council at Jerusalem, dealing with, the Israelite foreigners. It said next Paul and Silas traveled through the area of Phrygia and Galatia, all right, because the Holy Spirit had prevented them from preaching the word in the province of Asia at that time. Okay, which we know eventually he will go to Galatia, all right, and establish a church in Galatia. And that's where you get the book of Galatians. Okay, so we're beginning to see Paul come into contact, okay, with these churches that eventually he will write these epistles to. Okay, it said, then coming to the borders of Mysia, they they headed north from the province of Bithynia, but again, the spirit of Yahushua did not allow them to go there. So instead, they went on through Mysia and seaport of Troas. That night, Paul had a vision. A man from Macedonia in northern Greece was standing there, pleading with him, come over to Macedonia to help us. So we decided to leave for Macedonia at once, having concluded that the Most High was calling us to preach the good news there. So the Apostle Paul had a vision, okay, of a man, from Macedonia, pleading for help. He took that as a sign that the Lord wanted the gospel preached in Macedonia, showing you that it's all the will of Yahweh Shema Shai. It's all within his time, and that goes into being mature enough to understand when the spirit is saying no and not forcing the situation. Okay, and when the spirit is with a situation. Okay. Acts 16:11 said we boarded a boat at Troas and sailed straight across to the island of Samothrace, and the next day we landed in Neapolis. From there we reached Philippi, a major city of that district of Macedonia and a Roman colony, and we stayed there several days. And Philippi is named after King Philip II, the father of Alexander. Okay, because their kingdom was in Macedonia. Okay, you go into their history, but this city is actually named after King Philip II. Okay, the father of Alexander, to show you how heavily, how heavily Hellenized that place was, and shows you the power of the gospel. It will penetrate through all culture, no matter how deeply Hellenized a place was. Okay, the gospel, could penetrate and convert. Okay, those Israelite foreigners are monks. Okay, these former Greek city states now provinces of Rome. Okay, which you always hear brothers say the term the Greco-Roman Empire. Okay, because Rome, incorporated a lot of, the Greek customs. Okay, into their culture. You see, it says from there we reached Philippi, a major city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went a little way outside the city to a riverbank where we thought people would be meeting for prayer, and we sat down to speak with some women who had gathered there. Okay, one of them, Lydia from uh, Thyatira, a merchant of expensive purple clothes who worshiped the Most High. As she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart and she accepted what Paul was saying. She was baptized along with other members of her household, and she asked us to be her guests If you agree that I am a true believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay in my home. And she urged us until we agreed. She pretty much begged them, to stay with them. So you had women, that was helps, to the ministry. Okay. You had women, even certain women of status, okay, because amongst, the Greco-Roman society, it was highly patriarchal, but then the women still had certain, you know, rights, ownership in particular things. Okay. And those women that believe, they use, their privilege in their society to forward the church, to help forward the church, to help forward the brothers, all right, the apostles, and that was their way of helping, with the ministry. It said Acts 16:16 says, one day, as we were going down to the place of prayer, we met a demon, all right, a demon possessed slave girl. She was a fortune teller who earned a lot of money for her masters. Okay. You had this woman with a demon, the little slave girl with a demon on her, She had heavy spirits on her. She was able to be a fortune teller. Okay. And her masters made a lot of money, okay, off that hustle, man. It says she followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, these men are servants of the Most High power, and they have come to tell you how to be saved, showing you that those demons they know certain spirits, and this is why on all levels, okay, we be a target, okay, for uh for when we go on our day to day, the demons know who we are, and that's why we can feel targeted when we out and about. Certain situations that happen. Demons be trying to get a reaction out of you. Okay, on these people. Okay, because these spirits know who's who. They know those that are of the Most High. That's why later on, you get to the Book of Acts, and the demon told the Jake that was trying to imitate the apostles. He said, "How shy I know Paul, I know, but who are you?" And that demon beat him out of his clothes, man. Okay, but these demons know, all right, who the true believers are. Okay, and they're everywhere. Always trying to provoke a reaction. That's why we say you have to be in the spirit. Know how to maneuver and use wisdom in real time situations. It says she followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, these men are servants of the Most High power, and they have come to tell you how to be saved. This went on day after day until Paul got so, all right, exasperated. Okay, he was agitated. Then he turned and said to the demon within her, I command you in the name of Yahweh Shah HaMashiach to come out of her. And instantly it left her, and to show you the dominion that Yahweh Shah has over, the demons. Okay, we serve a power that's over these demons, man. Okay, you see, we serve, all right, the throne directly. Okay, the throne of Yahweh Shah, which is right at the right hand of the throne of the Heavenly Father. Okay, so we serve the Most High authority, Yahweh, in the name of His Son, Yahweh Shah. Okay, and you see by that authority, by that name, them demons had to get out of there. You see, and it says her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered, so they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace. The whole city is in the uproar because of these Jews. They shouted to the city officials. Okay, so they looked at Apostle Paul and Silas and look, man, because of these two and their message. You see, because Jake hated like now. Jake look at us as a disruption of their life. Their so-called peace in Babylon. Jake look at us as a disruption of their peace and their normalcy. Okay, in America, man, or in the West. you know, and that's why you see Jake is in the uproar on TikTok. And if they could, they would grab brothers up. And even these Jakes that push that whole pedo thing, they really wish something would happen to us. They really wish Esau would act on it and do something to us, man. Behind it. That's why Jake won't let it go, because Jake really wants something to happen behind it. Them making them false, accusations, man. Okay, showing you same niggas are back. Okay, and it says the whole city. It says the whole city is in uproar because of these Jews. They shouted to the city officials. They are teaching customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. Okay, so Jake would rather be a Greek or a Roman. Like Jake would rather be American. Jake would, and that's why you see a lot of Jakes denouncing being a Hebrew Israelite. Okay, you got Jake that's firmly against us being Hebrew Israelites, against them, even though they're Israelites, whether they proclaim it or not, they still Israelites. But Jake would rather be okay American, African American, okay, or some type of sub race of America, black, Hispanic, okay, colored, whatever, Negro. You see, that's what Jake would rather be. Okay, and that's why a lot of Jake gonna be melted in this American desert, since they want to be American so goddamn bad. Okay, the Most High gonna make you part of the land of America. All right, he gonna melt you into America, man. Okay, it says a mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with wooden rods. All right, with wooden rods. Okay, and then it's all for the gospel's sake, man. Okay, they were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape. So this also goes into in that Second Timothy 2, because they were suffering for the sake, of Yahweh. And see, in this time, we're not receiving, physical, okay, beatings, but we receive a lot of mental beatings, okay, a lot of mental lashes, okay. But you go to 2 Timothy 2:12, it says, if we endure hardship, we will reign with him. Okay, and you see the apostles enduring all the hardship that comes with teaching in the name of Yahweh, believing on Yahweh. Okay, they have to endure hardships as we endure hardships, and it's going to get much worse going into the times that we're going into. We're going to have to deal with more hardship. There's more hardship to come. Okay, this is our we're coming into the last phase of refinement for the believers. So the Most High has to turn up the furnace. Okay, and we got to endure it, and we built to endure it. If we of the elect, we're built to endure it. If we endure hardship, we will reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. Okay, so we see these examples of the apostles. No matter what circumstances, they never denied Yahweh. Okay, they took whatever came with it. Okay, the good, the bad, the in between, they took whatever came with it, and they never denied Yahweh. And that's the stance we're gonna have to take. All right, that we're taking now. We're taking this daily, because there are certain backlashes now as we serve Yahweh, as we become more and more tapped in. We deal with certain hardships. Okay, certain persecutions. Every brother's circumstance is different, you know, but it's rooted in our faith and what we believe. It says, verse 23 says, and they were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape. So the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet into stocks. At midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to the Most High, and other prisoners were listening. So the Heavenly Father is going to use this, all right, as a testimony. Okay, Paul and Silas are being used as a testimony, and then two brothers, Eliashua Wumble, the beloved brother Eliashua Wumble, he says often about how the Lord will have us, go through things just so we can be an example to the church, an example to the believers. The Lord calls us to go through a thing, of suffering, just to be an example of perseverance and faith. So like, to be an example, of resilience and perseverance in the faith. Okay, and then to be a lesson to the church, you know. So the Lord calls, certain brothers to go through particular hardships to be a testimony for the rest of the body. That's why it's always bigger than us. See, when we understand it's bigger than us, we get over, this is not fair. Why? We ask these things, and it's like we in the flesh. Sometimes you're like, damn, why? Damn, it seems like it's always me. Like, why, But now the Lord, is always working a work that's bigger than us, man. Okay? And he always comes through. Like the scriptures say, the chastening don't feel good in the present, but it's working the work. Okay? It says, suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundation. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. Okay? So there was an earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundation, and all the doors immediately flew open. Okay? So the Lord now is working a miracle. Okay? And then the Apostle Paul is going to show a lot of character. Okay? The Apostle Paul, the Lord had Apostle Paul moving very strategic to draw in believers. It says, in the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoner had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here. Okay, and you have to think, as Paul and Timothy was singing those, they was praising the Most High and singing them hymns. The people knew, everybody in their cell knew that it was the Most High, okay, that did that because they was praising the Most High, saying the name, praising Yahweh, singing. So they knew the power that did that. So the Apostle Paul had to tell, because what stopped all of them from leaving? Okay, except Paul instructed them. Paul, because Paul used every opportunity to edify or try to convert. The Apostle Paul, Yahweh Bashim Shai had Apostle Paul moving very strategic in his ministry, man. He was very versatile. He had a lot of range, and he had a lot of draw. Okay. And that was his gift in Yahweh Bashim Shai. It said the jailer called for lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, sirs, what must I do to be saved? They replied, believe in the Lord Yahweh Shai, and you will be saved along with everyone in your household. Okay, there's going to be whole houses saved. Men, women, and children. A brother and their family. Whatever that situation might be, whatever it might look like, but it's going to be, brothers and their families delivered. Okay? The Most High is going to deliver whole families, man. Reset whole families in righteousness, man. Okay? We serve a mighty power, a just power. You see, a merciful beyond, what we deserve. It says, and they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household, even at that hour of the night. The jailer the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. Okay, his household was converted. They followed him. And there's gonna be whole family delivered for following that man. Okay, and that's gonna be the test in Jacob trouble. That family continue to follow that man. Okay, they're gonna follow that man to deliverance. Okay, verse 34 says he brought them into the house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they believed in the Most High. Okay, the next morning, so the Most High did a mighty work, to convert. All right, the household of the jailer. Okay, then the Spirit had to where all those prisoners stayed because Paul knew if those prisoners left, okay, that jailer was going to be put to death. That's why he was ready to put himself to death. Okay, because it it was different back then. You didn't just get a nigga escape a prison today. Okay, it's just now you got to put a manhunt out now. Back then, the jailer was a great responsibility. And if a prisoner got out, they had no choice but to, assume that you helped. Okay, and you would get put to death behind it. Okay, so this was the jailer back then was on the way more. Okay, the stakes were way higher than your modern correctional officer. Okay, it said the next morning the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, let those men go. So the jailer told Paul, the city officials have said you and Silas are free to leave, go in peace. But Paul replied, they have publicly beaten us without a trial and put us in prison, and we are Roman citizens. So the Apostle Paul, going back to being strategic, he knew how to play that Roman card in his favor, okay, for the gospel's sake. The Apostle Paul, I say, the Lord had him extremely strategic to he utilized everything to forward the gospel. His Roman citizenship, okay, his ability to talk in multiple languages, okay, his upbringing as a Pharisee, okay. We're gonna continue on in the book of Acts. You're gonna see, that the Apostle Paul, he uses everything to his disposal for the forwarding of the gospel and to get out of certain situations, to get out of jams, you know. And it says when the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So they came to the jail and apologized to them. Then they brought them out and begged them to leave the city. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned to the home of Lydia. There they met with the believers and encouraged them once more. Then they left town. Okay, so that was a heavy chapter. So it introduces Timothy. Okay, it shows a miracle. Paul and Silas being in prison. Okay, and then it shows how savvy Apostle Paul had wits. you know, and it shows you also too. This was the peak of the Roman Empire, so being a Roman citizen was a major thing. And just like America, they use that same tactic. Citizenship. Is like being part of this exclusive club. You get American citizenship today. You know, it does open you up to certain perks, and Rome used that as well. Okay, this was a way that they pampered. All right, their conquered people. Okay, was to allow them Roman citizenship. Okay, and Rome wasn't a nationality. Okay, it was an empire. It was a government. It was an empire. And the top of that government was Edomites. Okay, but you had other nations, all right, including Israelites that were Roman citizens, man. So yeah, that's the point. Just want to get into that. Lord will, you brothers and you sisters edify once again. Want to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Kakwadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessing salutation, hopefully, shalom.